What's that? A caribou. But only we call that a caribou, it turns out. Turns out that other people call them reindeer. Here's a different caribou. What's this caribou doing? Maybe. It's what they do when they see predators. It's turning to you and looking at you, freezing in the moment. What's about to happen? It's getting ready to run really fast. It turns and it stares the person or the thing that's pursuing it in the eye before it gets ready to run. This is a moment that has been given to us by evolution. And it turns out that a fit deer, reindeer, or a caribou can usually outrun a wolf. This is this critical moment of pause when it turns, faces, and then they're on for the chase, but the caribou wins. Not all the time, obviously, every so often you have to lose so the wolves have a chance. But for the most part, the caribou can outrun a wolf. Now, what if it turns out I am a human hunter and the caribou turns to me, pauses, looks me in the eye? It's a beautiful moment because it's a great time to shoot the thing, either with an arrow or with a projectile weapon. Boom. And so Ingold says that for wolves, caribou are easy to find. They usually know where they are, but hard to kill. Whereas for humans, caribou are hard to find, but if they do this, easy to kill. Now, the biologists tell us that this turn to the predator thing is honed by years of evolution in which they were hunted by wolves. This gave them an advantage when they're being hunted by wolves. But when humans come along, it's not the best thing. An advantage that turns into this disadvantage. The Cree hunters, who are the primary hunters in this environment, have a different explanation for this moment, though. What happens when the caribou or reindeer turn to the hunter and look? What does that mean? It's obviously offering itself up in a gesture of love, circle of life stuff. And the hunters say it's like love or sex. It's like regeneration. It's a non-violent act because the animal is giving itself to the hunter. It's like this beautiful moment of love here. Regeneration. This isn't violence. This is the good stuff. Now, these are stories about hunting. If you were a Western scientist, or what I'm going to call here, someone who is schooled in mainstream Western thought, and you heard a person, a Cree hunter, tell you that the animal was offering itself up to you in the spirit of love, giving itself, and that's why this was a beautiful moment. What might you think about that person? The scientist, what might you think about this story? I don't even know if we have to be a scientist. We'd look at it as Ingold describes, with a mixture of cynicism and incredulity, disbelief. You're like, I don't think so. You might say that what this Cree hunter is doing is dodging the ethical issues of killing other creatures by pretending that it's an act of love. As Ingold says, is this person nuts to believe this? Are they lost in a fog? Have they been smoking too much stuff around the fire to come up with these stories? Or are they simply talking in allegories, making things up? Or having us on, just lying and joking around and giving us a good tale from, not really in grasp of reality, or maybe making a joke about that. So this would be the idea that your typical scientifically trained person would have, and probably many people who've been raised in the Western school system would be like, I don't think so. What are we supposed to do as anthropologists? In anthropology, what I'll call the standard anthropological response, we're not supposed to say this is true or not true. The anthropologists don't go in and say, well, I don't believe your religion. That's not up to us, or I don't believe your story. You're just supposed to suspend your disbelief. Like, you might not believe it, but You're not trying to disprove the person or make fun of them. What you want to do is to put this into context of its culture. And in its cultural context, this idea makes sense because of the worldview or from the view of the people in this territory, the northern hunters of the Cree have a view that the animals are regenerating the life force. When they turn, this is quintessentially an act of love. What the anthropologist is supposed to do is to bring this to you, bring this point of view and make it make sense to you as a cosmology, as like a religious view of the world, a worldview. And we don't necessarily have to believe everything that people say, but we should use some cultural relativism here to understand where they're coming from and why they might have these ideas. So we have 2 points of view here that on the face of it are usually opposed. And I would say that in most anthropology classes, this is as far as we get. We're like, well, here's what the scientists say, but here's what the people say. And it's important to understand what people are saying, and we just leave it at that. In this class, or I guess so let me put it to you slightly differently. So if we have the mainstream Western scientific thought perspective, you have this idea that there's only one right way to do things, and we have the answers to this, and we're going to discover the truth of things as based in science. And in anthropology, it's more that we're trying to practice cultural relativism and we're trying to see things from different points of view. And we say that there's not just one point of view on things, there's several different points of view, and that we might use this to question the typical assumptions that people have about their lives and about how secure they are in what they are doing. Now, in most anthropology classes, that's pretty good enough. That's a good place to just realize the Cree are making sense and to get you to engage in what Ingold calls perceptual relativism. That is to say, to understand why people might see things differently from a different point of view. One person goes and sees, that this is hunting an animal as a violent act, and another person sees the same act as an act of love and regeneration. Simply different people from different cultures perceiving the world in slightly or maybe very different ways. In this class, what we're trying to do is to interrogate or to question some of these standard anthropological assumptions and approaches. Because the standard ideas of anthropology doesn't disrupt or interrupt Western thought, it simply changes your perspective a little bit. So the scientist is still there studying nature, and anthropology is studying the culture construction of nature. The point of this, though, is not that we necessarily want to disrupt Western thought, but that we want to go beyond the standard anthropological approach in order to learn from people and the world in which they are operating in. This is cultural ecology. What we're trying to do here is to go beyond the idea that there are simply different cultural ideas about nature or cultural ideas about the world, to listen to how people might be able to apprehend the world and tell us something about the world itself. Now, for most of the years that I've been teaching this class and in this book, I have called what we're fighting against here mainstream Western thought. In this class, I just want to raise the question, and I'm not always sure if this is true, but it might be an update on this, which will help us understand what's going on here. We're going to be talking a lot about various situations in which people are confronting indigenous lifeways and indigenous perceptives versus other ways of thinking about the world. And I've described this as a question, but it might help us. Is Western thought better known as settler colonialist ideology? That is the ideology of people who are displacing other people from their lands. And I'm just flagging that here for later on because sometimes Western thought sounds very philosophical and it doesn't capture what was going on in terms of different points of view in Europe. But the settler colonialist ideology justified the displacement of other peoples from their lands may be more what we're after here. In that spirit, I just want to say that Ingold will use the word indigenous without a capitalization. In the last few years, we've started to try to capitalize the word indigenous so that we know that we're talking about a form of life or an indigenous people. That goes with this move toward really taking indigenous perspectives and indigenous people seriously. So again, we are here to do some interrogating of the standard anthropological approach. Ingold says that although it seems like the anthropologists are telling people to be more culturally sensitive and culturally relative, although it seems like anthropologists are often opposing themselves to this Western presumption and arrogance, that when we call these stories, these hunting stories, a cultural construction, what we're doing is what he terms a double disengagement. And what that is that we have two steps of disengagement. One, we take the humans out of nature and we say humans are the ones that have culture, other creatures don't. The reason that science can study nature is because humans have built up all these cultural things, and then they're going to study nature as it is. But the second disengagement is we take anthropologists out of culture and raise ourselves above the people we're studying in some ways. And we say, we all have our cultural constructions of nature, and I'm just going to be the one that's describing this to you. Only from a point of observation beyond culture is it possible to regard the Cree understanding of the relation between hunters and caribou as but one possible construction. So yes, what Ingold is saying is that anthropologists typically, and this is well illustrated by a diagram here, which he says, is that you have the world here, nature, and that human beings are above that world, and we live in this cultural world in which we're thinking about nature. But then there's the anthropologists studying all these people's worldviews. Now, we're supposed to be taking them seriously. We're supposed to be understanding what they're saying from their own perspective. But to do that, we're pulling ourselves way out of, we're doubly disengaging ourselves from the people themselves. Because as Ingold says, for the people we're talking about, this isn't their cosmology, this is their life. This is what they're doing. It's not just a story about the world, it is the world. What Ingold wants us to try to do is to go back into the world, to retrace those two steps in the reverse direction so that we can level the ranking between indigenous accounts, Native American accounts, if you'd like, or wherever we're studying, level the ranking between the people that are talking to us and these scientific accounts, which often get the last word in our society. What Ingold is trying to do is to really take people seriously, that we would have to insert ourselves, insert that into our own thinking and our own worldview, and that by doing that, we'll gain a much better perspective on life, the world, the creatures in it. Again, Ingold is not against doing science. He's not against doing anthropology, but he's saying that oftentimes to do that, we're disengaging from the people themselves. We might be telling you a better story than others about what they're thinking. We're not trying to make fun of them, but we're still not taking them seriously as people who might be able to talk to us about that. It's important to realize that we're not trying to be down on the biologists or down on the Cree hunter either, but that we might try to gain knowledge from both of them rather than knowledge about them. It's a subtle distinction. It's a distinction between, that's the way I'm going to put it. It's a distinction between getting knowledge about people and going to people for knowledge, which is usually the anthropologists come back with knowledge about people or knowledge about something rather than trying to get knowledge about their life. I think that's what I'm going to claim is that anthropological theory that we're trying now, or I'm going to say that what I'm trying to do with this heady anthropological theory stuff is to say something not about the history of anthropological thought, as it were, but about life itself, about what we can learn about how people have approached life. These are two big people, giants of anthropological thought. Claude Lévi-Strauss is maybe one of our most famous anthropologists, the most famous French anthropologist for sure. And Gregory Bateson, fairly famous American anthropologist. And he revisits some of their writings from the 1970s. They were both very inspirational. He says that for Claude Lévi-Strauss, they were both interested in these questions of the mind and the world. So how do we go through life, or how do we reconcile the relationships between our minds and the world? And for Lévi-Strauss, at least according to Ingold, in his lectures, what you would have is the mind receiving information from the world, and it was the mind that decoded the information that was out there. And so Lévi-Strauss was very into, he was the founder of what is called structural anthropology. He was very into binaries and the ideas that you see these things in the world, but they don't make sense to you until your mind processes them. And it's in your mind that does most of the decoding. Bateson had a very different approach in which he was questioning these very boundaries or these lines between the mind and the world. And the example that works the best in here that Bateson uses, he calls it the blind man's cane, but we'll update it and call it the blind person's cane, is that if you are unsighted and you are moving around in the world with a cane and feeling out there into the world, where does the mind stop and the world begin? That you are moving through the world and perceiving with it, and it's all part of the same system. But for someone who is apprehending the world in this way, they are moving through the world and trying to pick up features of it as they move. In the same way that for those who are sighted, we scan the world and we move with our eyes to perceive the world. For Bateson and for others in this tradition, you don't just sit there and receive information from the world. You have to move in the world and scan it and look at it and draw things out of it because you're actively perceiving it in the world. And so the world opens up to us not as a process of decoding, but as a process of revelation. Is being revealed to us as we move through it, which is why sitting in class watching PowerPoint is a terrible way to learn. So in Lévi-Strauss's world, here's the mind, which is enclosed in his big head brain, and out there is the world, and you get information across it. Whereas Bateson still has a brain mind, but there's the crucial part is that movement into perception so that you can see the world. Now, in Lévi-Strauss's view, he does eventually dissolve this dichotomy because the mind and the world are made of the same stuff and we all apprehend it as binaries. It's an unanswerable question because we're not here to figure out what Claude Lévi-Strauss said. We're here to figure out how to live. I'm not going to say that it all starts to make sense around page 19 to 20, but that's where Ingold pulls some things together here when he talks about the environment and its relationship to the organism. Ingold wants to make 3 points about the relationship between the organism and the environment. One of them is the environment is always a relative term. No organism without an environment and no environment without an organism. So you need you need both of them in relationship to each other. You don't have an environment if you don't have an organism, and conversely, you don't have an organism without some environment. So the second point is that the organism and environment are an indivisible totality, that they form you can't separate them from each other, or you can, but only by cutting out one piece of it, and that totality is always in process. Organic life, as I envisage it, as I see it, active rather than reactive, the creative unfolding of an entire field of relations within which beings emerge and take on the particular forms they do, each in relation to the others. So what he's trying to say here is that the organism and the environment are reacting to each other in this process with all the other organisms that are in the environment. What he doesn't want us to do is confuse the idea of the environment with what we call nature. Nature can only be nature for a being that has taken itself out of it and stands apart from it. So we as humans like to pull ourselves up and say we're in nature. I was trying to think about how to illustrate this. So if we are here in this classroom, we don't seem to be in nature by any stretch of the imagination. But you could say we're in an environment. This is an environment, one that has been built around us. Now, why is it to go down to Pine Lake and you step outside, would you say, ha, I'm in nature? What I'm saying is we're always in an environment, but we've chosen to call some environments nature. Well, what environments do we choose to call nature? The more things you see that are human, built, and people around you, the less you are inclined to say nature. So what does that say about us? It means that we consider ourselves to be unnatural, outside of nature, which is what Ingold wants to do, or wants to bring us back to, is this idea that we put the humans into the world as beings within a world rather than apart from it. Thus, the distinction between environment and nature corresponds to the difference in perspective between seeing ourselves as beings within a world and as beings without it. So if you say, oh, I'm in nature, and that means it's because there's no humans or stuff around, that means that everything that's human is not part of that world. Trying to reorient ourselves as people that are in a world, all in an environment. But I'll try to answer this question with this diagram. So in typical Western science, an organism is what has life inside it, right? Here I am walking around. I have life inside me. And that's the typical Western view, is that we are living things and we have life inside of us. And that life in biology is defined and determined by the DNA. That's how you get the organism. The organism, as it comes into the world, into this environment, is already predefined by the stuff we call DNA, which then gives us the prescription for the organism. So in typical Western science biology, you have an organism coming into an environment which is already defined. The environment is defined because that's what it is. It's a container. And the organism is defined by the DNA, and life is inside the organism. Whereas what we're going to be after here is the ecology of life. In this view of the world, life is the force that is all around us, flowing through things like a river or a field of exploding things. The life force, and we as creatures are like little eddies in the stream, or little concentrated folds within it that gather for a moment and are held together, and then we go back into the life, the world. So with the help of AI, I've generated this picture of it. I'm going to try illustrating this one other way, which is the title of this class. So Ingold says he wants an ecology of life. That's what, a true ecology of life. And every so often I've thought I should change the name of this class to just ecology. What would happen to me if I changed the name of this class to ecology? I'd probably get some administrative smackdown from the biology department. And what would you learn in this course? How many people, how many humans would be in my course? I can't teach ecology, but I can teach cultural ecology. Who's going to be in cultural ecology? Lots of humans, very few fungus. Lots of hunters, very few caribou. We'll talk about the caribou, but not that much. We're mainly talking about the people making up stories about them. So you can see what's happened here. If it's ecology, the people disappear. If it's cultural ecology, all of a sudden the people are all over the place. That's all we're talking about. That's all we know.